Hello, welcome to the Rotch-Jones-Duff House and Garden Museum. I'm Dawn Salerno, I'm the Executive Director here at the museum, and I'm going to take you through some of the rooms today and show you a little bit about the families that lived here. It's a very special time in the house because it's decorated for the Christmas holiday. So we're going to learn a little bit about today's traditions and the traditions that the families celebrated between 1834 and 1981. So we're in the parlors, the double parlors of the Rotch-Jones-Duff House now, and right to my left is the Christmas tree currently decorating the parlors. At the time that the families lived here, you would not have seen a tree so grand as this one to my left. The Roaches didn't celebrate Christmas at all. It was actually only made a national holiday in 1870, so it's no coincidence that in 1871 we do know of a Christmas party that was thrown by the Jones family. And again, they lived here between 1851 and 1935. So in 1871, we have a record of them throwing a Christmas party. Now the tree that they had was probably more like a tabletop tree, something that could have sat on a surface. It was decorated with more likely fruits and nuts. And it was on this tree that they also tied little poems for the guests to their party. So at this party, we know that several guests were invited. We have the guest list, and they were asked to bring a gift of no more than $1, worth no more than $1. In equivalencies today, that's about $26 today. So the guests brought this gift. They wrote a poem for the recipient, and they hung both on the tabletop tree. So that's more of the type of Christmas tradition that we had followed in the Jones era of this house. By the Duff era, and the Duffs are moving in 1935 and living here until it becomes a museum, really, in 1980. This is right about where Mrs. Duff had a tree one year. We, in fact, have a picture of her in front of a tree in 1941. There's a tree right in the same window where it could have been seen by passers-by. Now, over my other shoulder, you'll see that we've decorated some of the mantles of in the house. And this type of fireplace would have been used for heat in the Roach and Jones era. So you have to imagine sitting by the fire for just enjoyment to get the most out of that heat. And the mantles were decorated in the Duff era. We know that they decorated both the mantles, and since they were not using the fireplaces for heat so much, they would put their own Christmas decorations right in the fireplace. Namely, some creche scenes would go into their fireplaces. We're now in the back parlor. As I mentioned before, these are double parlors, so one to our west side, one to our east side. We call them the front and the back parlors. Both used by guests and both used for entertaining. All three families that lived in the house would use these parlors for entertaining guests. And since I'm standing right by a piano, which happens to be a real Steinway with real ivory keys, you should know that this piano was used to entertain guests. Both Amelia Jones and Beatrice Duff played piano quite well. And so they would have guests over and they would play for their guests. Other people would play the piano, and even today, when we have concerts in the parlors, we invite musicians to play this piano because it's really the best thing for a piano is for it to be played. So also behind me is probably the largest work of art in the house, outside of the house itself, the Carpenter's Son. And we have a photo of Amelia Jones playing her piano in front of this very painting. So we do know that during the Jones era, this painting hung right here on this very wall. And that photo documentation tells us this. This is a painting by Edward Simmons, and it's called The Carpenter's Son, but it actually has some symbolism that relates it to the story of Jesus Christ, and the little boy in the center is a kind of a metaphor or a symbol for being Jesus Christ. It's a carpenter's son. There's wood shavings on the floor, and if you're close enough to see the light kind of shining in on the boy's head, it almost creates kind of like this heavenly halo-like effect to the boy. So the carpenter's son with some heavy symbolism suggesting that that's actually Jesus Christ. This is a portrait of one of our namesakes. This is William Roach Jr., and he's the builder of this house. In 1834, he hired an architect, Richard Upjohn, and they built this house with shipwrights. So if you were to visit the house, you would notice a lot of the woodwork is curved, and that's what shipwrights were known to be, to excel at. It was really curving wood. So William Roach builds the house in 1834 based on his fortunes at whaling. So he was the Rockefeller, we like to say, the Rockefeller of whaling. And by the time he moved into this house, he was in his 70s. He was late in his career. He was really about to retire. But it did give him the wealth to be able to afford a grand house like this up in a wealthier neighborhood. County Street was where a lot of whaling agents and captains happened to live, and we still have the evidence of it today in these beautiful houses on County Street. After William Roach, we know that the house sold to Edward Coffin Jones, also a businessman related to the whaling industry, and Edward Coffin was an agent. So agents were responsible for putting together the whole voyage. They hired the captains, they might have owned the ships or part-owned ships, and they put together the crews and the provisions. So that was the agent's job, and it was kind of a level above something like a captain. So he too was a wealthy man, established quite a bit of wealth off of the whaling industry, and he gets the house in 1851, buys it directly from William Roach. The last family to live in the house, Mark and Beatrice Duff, they were already living in New Bedford, strangely enough, just a few blocks down on County Street. But Mark Duff came across this house for sale, and he was very concerned that at the time, which was about 1935, houses like this one were being subdivided and changed from their original grandeur. So Mark, in a way, we like to think of him as a preservationist of sorts. He and Beatrice bought the house in 1935, and they lived in it until it became a museum in 1981, or until, I should say, until it was purchased and then evolved into a museum, which was 1985. We actually incorporated it as a museum. A mantle like this shows a little more accuracy in what you might have seen in the 1870s to 1930s in this house. So we have yet another fireplace. There are 5 fireplaces on the first floor of this house, 5 chimneys, 5 fireplaces, 5 mantles, all decorated for the holidays today. But the fruit decoration was something that would have been real fruit, of course, at the time. And the decorators today wanted to kind of pay homage to that reality that in the time of the Jones family, between 1851 and 1935, that these might have been the types of decorations that they would put up on their mantles. So one thing we have to talk about when we think about holiday traditions is food. It's something we all have in common, we all eat, and around holiday times we might have special recipes, special foods we eat, we gather around tables to share meals together. So we are in the dining room of the house currently. It was a dining room for all 3 families and never anything but. The grand table that's set well, it's set for 6 people right now. It actually was usually shrunken down to seat only 2 to 4 people. And that's mainly because Mr. Roach moved here with his wife Lydia, and there were no children at the time living in the house. It was just the 2 of them. Come the time of when the Jones family moved in, Mr. Edward Coffin Jones unfortunately lost his second wife. He did have 3 young daughters. So at the most, that family was 5 persons large. And then the last family living here, the Duffs, Mark and Beatrice, were again, had teenage daughters, but they often ate just the 2 of them at the dining table. So what you see is a grand table today set up for the holidays with this large centerpiece, was often set up just for 2. This was a formal dining situation, so people would have even dressed for dinner. They would not have come in their casual clothes to sit down to a meal. They would have been very formally dressed, children included. is the pantry of the house, and it was the pantry again for all three families. You needed a pantry in a large, wealthy household because you needed a place to store all your fine dining ware. And that is what this space was used for. It was served from, and so we also now have stored here, just like as would have been stored back when the families lived here, we have some of the fine dining ware stored here. So I often quiz people on what these glass dishes are because they're not really used in today's dining traditions, but they're finger bowls is what they are. So some water with maybe some lemon was put in them, and they would be set right on the dining table, and during the meal you could dip your fingers and kind of refresh and wash your fingers. So these are finger bowls, and throughout the pantry we have other sets that they're used during different kinds of dining in the formal dining room that we've seen. So we have tea sets, we have a set of Duff dining ware that they gave us recently, and this is really the place where the helpers of the household, the paid staff, would prepare to serve the dinner. This tea set was actually in the house during the Jones era, specifically Amelia Jones, who was one of the three Jones daughters. She spent most of her life in this household, and she was the one known for using this tea set and serving kind of more what we would consider formal teas. It was actually a very common thing to do to receive guests, that you might actually serve tea in something like this, a silver teapot. This particular teapot is from Tiffany & Co., and Tiffany & Co. is still around today, we know that. And the tea set is also a very formal tea set. The children referred to it as the French china. So here we have a little sample of a tea service, and we have a full tea service in our pantry as well. So we're now in what might have been considered to be the heart of the house, because no celebrations happened without food, and no food happened without the kitchen. So we are in the kitchen of the house, and right next to me is a coal-fired stove from 1873. This was installed by Edward Coffin Jones in his residency of the house. There's also a dumbwaiter, which would have helped bring food up from the summer kitchen, which was basically a fireplace in the basement of the house. And before, of course, air conditioning, even now you know how hot a stove can be, so who would want to be around a hot stove in the summer? The least they could do is use the basement, which was naturally cooler, and work around the fireplace in the basement, keeping it cooler. So summer kitchen in the basement, winter kitchen here on the first floor of the house. We're now in the hallway of the house, and because this is a Greek Revival house design, the hallway bisects the house. It's right in the center, it's very grand, it's very wide, so it makes for a very kind of grand entry into the house. We're at the stairwell that leads to the second floor, and this is where we can see one of the examples of the shipwrights that worked to build this house. This banister is original to the Roach era. It was here from the beginning, and it has a nice kind of serpentine shape to it, as does the stairwell. So that kind of skill level with bending wood is very apparent in this banister. It also lent itself to the children sliding down it during the Jones era. So the Roaches did not have children in their house. They were older when they moved in. Mr. Roach himself was in his 70s, but the Jones had 3 young girls, and then they had cousins later on. So those are the children that would slide down on their bellies on this railing. And we also know from accounts, letters being shared between cousins, that the pets of the house unfortunately slipped through the railings at least once and got injured. So no child injuries that we know of, but definitely some pet injuries on this railing. I'm standing in front of a portrait of Beatrice Duff, who was actually the last person to live in this house before it became a museum. And so in a way we can thank Beatrice for handing this house over to us. We did have a mortgage, we did pay for the house from Beatrice. There were actually two people contending for the property at the time. In 1981, when she did want to sell the house, a restaurant owner wanted to move into the space, start a restaurant, and pave over the gardens for parking for the restaurant. So a local group of concerned citizens decided that the history of this property could not be destroyed, and so they fought to purchase the house and turn it into a museum. Thanks to them, they were able to find the money to purchase the house at the time, and I believe it was $125,000 that they spent on the house. And thanks to Beatrice Duff, a lot of what we see in the house is her choices for decoration. So when we think about the men of the household, they earned the money that afforded the things, but the women of the household actually made a lot of the choices that decided what you would see in the house, what kind of wallpaper would be there, what kind of chandeliers, what china would be on the table. So their impact is very present in the house. Beatrice was known to be and Mark Duff as well, were known to be very neat people. They were also known to be very social people, and at least one of their parties was known to have 400 guests inside this house. And that, I can tell you, is a lot of people for this household. So thanks to Beatrice Duff, a lot of what you see in this particular room were her choices for decor, her choices that were in the wallpaper. It was her choice for the taffeta curtains, the bed dressings, and the dressing table that we still have intact with her actual dressing items on it. This is a special exhibition at the Rotch-Jones-Duff House right now. It's up through January 6th, and it's by Fairhaven artist Luis Duffy-Barre-Bar. This is an artist that has actually been setting up this large nativity scene in his own home for many, many years. We're lucky to have it here at the museum. We had it installed here last year as well. And according to the artist, this is a family tradition for him. So when he was in Peru growing up with his family and his grandmother specifically, they set up nativity scenes in their own homes. So this is his way of carrying on the tradition. As I said, we're lucky enough to have it in the museum, and you can all come visit it. Nativities are not, they're not strangers to this house, because as I mentioned, the Duff family would put smaller, much smaller nativity scenes in their fireplaces. They also had that same tradition of installing a nativity scene. This one has several thousand pieces. The largest pieces are, I would say, about 12 inches tall, and there's actually a water feature. Well, I hope you enjoyed that tour. I hope you all come back to see this for yourself, and happy holidays, everybody.